Hey, seventh graders, Mr. Brown here. This is my first try at this lecturing thing online. Let me know how it goes. Uh, I wanted to go over today's reading and also let you know what you can do to show me that you did read. So, again, here's what's going to happen. We're going to try to do readings on your own, and then I'll give these little spiels, little mini lectures on them. And then you could write a quick little Google Doc narration, share it with me, and that way I'll know that you've been paying attention, you've thought about the material, and it'll be a way for me to keep track of what you're doing. That's going to be the daily routine. Um, and maybe if I can get ahead of these, maybe you can watch a few more than just one at a time, or daily. You can, do more, maybe a couple in advance if you want to get ahead of on your work. But I'm going to try to. We'll see how that goes. But going to experiment with some different scenery in the background. Keep your attention if I can. So let's get started. So what was your reading for today? Well, it was about the turning point in the war. The uh, the South, the Confederate States of America, had been winning most of the battles up to this point. Um, at least that's the way it appeared, right? But remember what the North's strategy was. The North's strategy was to kind of strangle the South, and it was always going to be a sort of a waiting out process. So even though the Confederates looked like they were winning, they were losing soldiers, losing lots of material, and they were starting to starve actually. And even though they won those first few big battles, you might say, they really just couldn't keep up the pace. The North had so many more people. Remember, the USA had about 22 million people, whereas the South had about 9 million people. And out of those 9 million people, around 30 to 40% of them were African Americans who were slaves who were not going to be fighting. All right, so uh, just way outmatched. The North had more people, and they could afford to take these giant losses, as long as the South was taking some pretty big losses too. So we have some turning points. The war starts to shift in favor of the North, and that's what your book tried to explain to you today. There were some battles that initially the South wins. In the book it talks about the Battle of Chancellorsville and Fredericksburg, and those were battles where the North takes some heavy casualties, but so does the South. And also, the North tries to figure out who's going to be their leader. They go through a lot of different generals, and Lincoln is disappointed with all of them. They're all not super great. They're all kind of, um, I guess Lincoln's biggest complaint against them is they're just not aggressive enough. They're not capitalizing on their momentum. They just kind of are waiting around too much. And Lincoln really wants them to um, to be more decisive, to be more bold, to risk more things, and none of his generals are really doing that. They're getting outmaneuvered, outplayed by General Lee and Stonewall Jackson. But Stonewall Jackson, we saw in today's reading, dies. That's a huge loss for the Confederates because he was an amazing general. He was doing lots of good maneuvering and winning lots of battles. And so when he dies, that is a giant blow for the South. The book makes mention of uh, one of the biggest turning points was the Battle of Gettysburg, and we said that General Lee had two opportunities to take the battle to the north, and this is one of them. The Battle of Gettysburg is in Pennsylvania, so General Lee has to take his men out of the CSA, the Confederate States of America, march up north into Union territory, and there's a huge battle at Gettysburg. And lots of men die that day. Those 4 days, actually, remember the battle from your readings last over the course of 4 days, and all told, it's about 30,000 people die. And the Union wins. They chase Lee back. Lee has to retreat, and he's lost about 15,000 men. and the North has lost about 12,000 men. So both sides, heavy casualties at this point. And then your book um, spends a little bit of time talking about the Gettysburg Address. And it's such an important speech, we have to make mention of it. It's a speech that Lincoln gives to commemorate the sacrifice of the people who died that day, those days. And he takes a train, gets there. He writes the speech on the train, actually, and he's not even the main speaker. This is a lot of people talk about this, that he is not even the main guy. He's the president of the United States, but someone else is called on to speak for hours in front of him, and people stand up and watch the whole speech. You can see pictures of it online. I'm going to link in the description some videos on the Gettysburg Address, so you can sort of see some pictures, see some videos of it. Obviously not videos of it live or anything, but still frames, people that have captured that event. Lincoln only speaks for a few minutes giving this speech, and some people right away say, this is a great speech. Some people are like, the president gave a quick little 3-minute speech, wasn't anything great. But time has revealed, right, over many, many years, people keep coming back to this speech and saying, wow, there's a lot here in just a little bit of time. So I just want to read it to you. I won't do it in my Lincoln voice, but it's something you're familiar with, I'm sure. But as I read, I want you to listen to what's Lincoln's point here. What is he trying to tell the listeners after this great battle? Lots of people have died. They're commemorating the war and the battlefield. What's he saying? Here we go. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So Abraham Lincoln starts off by talking about the Declaration of Independence. 87 years ago, he says, we signed a document saying that we're going to be a new nation, and it's dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And you can hear echoes here of his anti-slavery ideas that he's been introducing, right? Remember at the beginning of the war, it's about union. It's about keeping the union together. But now it's turned, after the Emancipation Proclamation, it's turned to make the issue about slavery. And here you have him echoing it, even from the founding fathers. And there's a great civil war going on, he says in the next paragraph, but we can't dedicate this land, this battlefield, we can't make it a memorial, more so than the people who lived and died here have. Their effort has made it a holy place, he says. But he says what we can do is that we can be renewed in this effort to fight the Civil War. There were people who were getting fatigued and maybe a little bit just tired of the war. and they're like, Civil War's not worth it. All these people are dying. He says, we need to honor their sacrifice by giving our last full measure of devotion, and highly resolve that this isn't going to be for nothing. It's not going to be in vain, that we're going to continue and see this fight through to the end. So it's basically a rallying cry to keep the war going. It's been tough. There's lots of people dying. The North has suffered lots of casualties, but we're going to keep on going. And that's, again, the North's strategy, is to keep slowly but surely outlasting the South. And even though there's lots of death, if we just can keep on taking the fight to them, they just can't continue. They just don't have the numbers. They don't have the resources. They don't have the money. They don't have the stuff that the North has. And if we can just keep on taking it to them, eventually they're going to give up. So we're in it for the long haul. Lincoln says, we just got to stay resolved. Don't give up yet. So that's why the speech is given. But you can tell just by the language and the just the way he uses words, language here. It's an amazing, short charge to the nation. And it's people like Winston Churchill and others have said this is why English was invented. So this speech could be given. It was to them that great of a speech. And finally, your book makes mention of African Americans in war. And this was an important part of the turning points in the war, they say, and I think they're right, that after the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln, from the advice of several abolitionists like Frederick Douglass and others, say, you got to start letting African Americans fight in this war. Up to that point, Lincoln was kind of resistant to that. He didn't know how white fighters in the North would react, and so he just didn't want to get into those difficulties. He just thought it might create too many problems. But eventually, the war's been going on for so long, a lot of people are dying. He's like, all right, we need to go all in and let African Americans also contribute in this fight. And so he starts to integrate and include African Americans in the Union as Union soldiers. The book talks about the 54th Regiment in Massachusetts. I'm going to link to another video down in the description below, so you can watch a video on the 54th and some of the amazing battles that they were in. And they marched all the way even into deep into the South Carolina, and won some decisive battles down there with lots of bravery and valor. So this section really is all about the turning from the South to the North, the Confederates to the Union. Union starts to win now, and we're going to see the war wrapped up in our next reading. All right. See you guys.